Good afternoon and welcome to the Pittsburgh Land Bank Board of Directors meeting for Friday, December 10th, 2021. Our first order of business is the roll call. Dr. DeMonte Walker, if you please call the roll.
Reverend Ricky Burgess.
Here.
Dr. Jamil Bey.
Here.
Daniel Lavelle. Doug Anderson. Senator Wayne Fontana.
Here.
Bobby Wilson.
Here.
Steve Mazza.
Here.
Wanda Wilson. Karen Breen.
Here.
We have a quorum. That leads us to public comment. Members of the public who want to address this Land Bank Board of Directors, you'll be given 3 minutes. Please. Is there someone who wants to speak before us?
Or no registered public comment.
There's no registered public comments. Is there anyone in the audience who wants to address this Board of Directors meeting? If not, we go to the approval of the October 2021 minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes? They've been emailed. You've all seen them. Is there a second?
Second.
So moved.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
There's nay. I have one illustrious job, and that is to welcome our newest board member, Karen Breen. We are welcoming you to this meeting. This board. 2022 will be a stellar year for us. We will probably transact scores of properties, and you're going to see we both have money and resources and staff, so you're going to see us move very, very quickly now. And so we're glad welcome you to this board. Anything you want to say?
No, just that I'm sort of honored to have been appointed to fill the rest of DeMonte's term. So thank you all. I'm pleased to be here.
Okay, that turns that to Executive Director Dr. Walker.
Thank you, Chairman Burgess. So I'd like to echo Reverend Burgess's sentiments and welcome you, Karen. I've had the pleasure of working with you in other capacities with the URA, and I believe you're a great addition to the board, given your urban planning background and some of your other skill sets. So we are thrilled to have you here with us. All right, so I will get into the executive director updates. We've had quite a year here at the PLB. And so I want to do a year in review and give the board an up-to-date snapshot as to where we are, where we're headed, where we've been, where we are, and where we're headed. I will provide an update on MOU between the PLB and URA. We will talk about the GRB law contract, and we'll provide an update on a community cleanup that was done with Operation Better Block to start to demonstrate some of our community engagement and outreach endeavors. So I will not be speaking for the full 20 minutes. I have a wonderful staff here with me today that will provide some of those updates, and we'll introduce them as we get to those sections, okay? All right, so let's talk about major milestones for the PLB. At the beginning of the year, we presented to the board a plan to increase capacity and to increase resources for the PLB. So in November 2020, the URA integrated the PLB as an affiliate of the entity. The PLB is now located in the URA's Development Services Unit. That's where a lot of our land transactions and land recycling efforts happen. And we pair that with other development-focused affiliates such as the Pittsburgh Housing Development Corporation, our PEIDC, and El Tridra. So you have some vertical alignment and vertical integration that adds additional capacity to the work. So while the PLB may pay for 1 or 2 full-time employees, you have access to the full breadth of the URA's expertise, which I think has helped the PLB to move forward. So the URA determined that it would negotiate in good faith with the PLB board to provide direction and support to the PLB staff. So while the PLB staff members do work for the URA, they work at the behest of this board and under the direction of this board. The PLB manager, Greg Miller, was hired as a full-time staff member for the Land Bank in April 2021 and can be credited with a lot of the momentum that we see here within the PLB. The most notable items that I want to highlight for this board is the executed contract that we've done with GRB. You will get a full update from our attorney, Matt Sanders, on that in a moment, but that fundamentally positions the PLB to begin to rapidly clear title and to do a lien clearance on properties, which is something that has hindered the PLB for the last 4 years. And so with this private law firm under contract, and they have a robust knowledge of the city's inner workings around land recycling, they will be able to help us to clear the property reserve, within a 6 to 9 month time frame. And Matt, if I'm getting that time frame wrong, you don't be shy about correcting me there. So the updated URA and PLB MOU, we don't want the PLB to enter a protracted process in transacting land from the URA to the PLB. So the legal team has worked on a strategy that will allow pretty seamless transfer of property between the URA and PLB. PWSA and PLB MOU. So we know that PWSA liens are one of the major hindrances to being able to bring property back onto the tax rolls. So we've worked with the PWSA to reach agreement that will again add another feather in our cap to reduce the complexity around bringing properties back to productive use. And then we will provide an overview of imminent transactions that the board can expect to see close in January 2022. As Reverend Burgess said, we are going to scale up and become operational very quickly in 2022, and you should see that the first month of the year, which is pretty exciting. Okay, so the next item, Reverend Burgess, this is an action, so I'm going to turn this back over to you. Oh, I'm sorry, there are additional items. I do apologize. The last item here is a discussion regarding the ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act funding dollars. We've had conversations with the board about the allocation plan. The staff has made a recommendation. We've reached the juncture where we need the board to provide additional guidance and insight as to how you would like to see those dollars used. I will be reaching out to the board in early January to schedule a visioning session. We will all sit down and talk about that proposed plan and some of the priorities that the board would like to tackle over the next 3 years, given that $10 million in funding. All right, now for the authorization to enter into MOU. And I have Matt Sanders here with me, Reverend Burgess, to present this to the board and request your authorization.
Okay, first of all, we'll take a motion to approve, and then we'll have discussion before I bring the vote. Is there a motion to approve authorization to enter into the memorandum of understanding between the PLB and the URA? All right, now conversation.
Sure, do you want me to go ahead?
Yes.
Hi, everyone. Board, my name is Matt Sanders. I'm with URA. My name is Matt Sanders. I'm with URA Legal, providing support for the land bank. The tri-party agreement between the URA, the land bank, and the PLB was signed a few years ago that governs the relationship between the parties. In that MOU, there is a section that only covers transfers from the land bank to the URA and to the city. What it doesn't cover is transfers from the process for how properties transfer from the city and from the URA to the land bank, which is obviously going to be really important to how the land bank operates moving forward. So this MOU is meant to sort of streamline that process for URA transfers to the land bank. So for those who aren't aware of the URA's disposition process, it can take up to 3 board actions before a deed is actually executed and signed. This MOU would allow that process to be done as part of a single board action, while also not requiring the land bank to provide certain requirements the URA usually asks from developers, such as zoning and permitting, site plans, things like that, things that the land bank may or may not have at the time that they receive the land. So what this MOU is doing is basically streamlining the process, the URA's process of disposition to the land bank, to just make it more seamless and ultimately get the properties in the hands of the land bank so they can get to end users quicker.
One of the ways to think about this, virtual isn't the right word. Think of all the properties that the city owns, the URA owns, and the land bank owns as one big thing, right? That even though they're held by separate organizations, they are really one big thing. And then we move those properties to whichever entity is in best position to recycle them. In some cases, it will be the land bank. In some cases, actually will be the city. And in other cases, it will be the URA. And so one of the ways to think about it, and I think those are the three, those are the three major. The only fourth one that owns significant amount of property would be the housing authority, but their mission is so distinct and separate. They tend not to get rid of their property, they tend to keep it. So anyway, that's the way to think about it. And what this does is it allows us to streamline the process of moving them. Like we already have a process quickly. We can move property to the URA. Council can do it very quickly, right? We can introduce legislation and move it to the URA, from the city to the URA very quickly, right? We always can move stuff back to the city because it's always ours. So the moving it from any entity to the city is seamless because we're the default owner anyway, right? So if there's no owner, we're the owner. So that's easy. But there's no fast way to move it from the URA. And there's actually a fast way to move it from the city to the land bank. The same process we use to move it to the URA, the city move it to the land bank. But they're difficult is the URA has its own, once it gets in the URA hands, they have their own long process of engagement before it moves properties. In part, this now allows us to get the property quicker, which means we can do our due diligence and not replicate their process of getting it to the end user. Did I explain that, Ron?
That's an excellent explanation. Generally, the URA is working with the developer or the end user to transfer properties directly to them. Since the land bank is going to be in a better position to transfer certain properties to certain end users, it makes sense to not make the land bank go through all of the URA's requirements that we're generally going to require from developers, because then the land bank's not doing development anyway. So this sort of streamlines that process to get it in the land bank's hands, so the land bank can do the disposition for certain properties.
Mr. Wilson, I saw your hand.
Okay, so it was helpful to hear your comments because we already do have the ability, if for some reason we do want to go from the city to the land bank, that's already been done.
There's nothing that says in the tri-party that can't be done. There's just not a process in the tri-party right now that explains how that actually works. And that's actually in the works right now with the city. It's city law.
Okay, so that'll come up. So similarly, how we see B, the second part of B, in the future, we would see another MOU being created for the city.
Right. And that'll just be an amendment to the tri-party, which is what governs it right now.
Okay. All right, great. So then my other question was related to, I see it's further down the agenda, but when we do start to work on that, there's far more properties than just what exists in the property reserve. So would we be including that as well in the MOU, that we would have access, that we could transfer far more than what's in the property reserve?
Right. I mean, anything that comes from the city, whether it's in the property reserve or not,
Yeah.
once that new MOU is signed or that amendment to the tri-party, will govern that. As it pertains to the property reserve right now in the GRB contract, which we'll touch on this in a second. Those properties are absolutely going to go directly from the city to the end user. They're not gonna come to the land bank first. But we can touch on that second point here in a second. But this,
Yeah.
but
We'll
this
touch on it,
MOU that we're going to ultimately sign, or the amendment to the tri-party with the city, is going to govern everything that they have that comes to us eventually.
Okay. What does that timeline look like going back to the Pittsburgh to PLB MOU? That's in our law department.
It's right now in the law department. It's been approved by our legal team.
Okay.
So the law department's actually said that they would review that they would review it this week. So I'm hoping that that's gonna be on the table pretty soon.
Okay, thanks.
Any other conversation?
The only thing that I'd like to add is one of the things we tried to focus on this year is less about making the PLB a landowner and actually doing the structural fixes to enable it to transfer property. The city and the URA already own a large swath. The problem is that the end users, and we've identified the property reserve because those folks have waited, 5 to 6 years for these properties to move. And so by doing the legal and structural fixes, we enable that to happen. If the board would like to focus on the PLB as a landowner moving into 2022, we can have that discussion. I would actually recommend thinking of the PLB as more of a mechanism and less of a landowner. The goal is to get to an end user and bring it back to productive use. And by this structural fix that we did with moving the PLB under the URA allows us to get to that virtuality that you're talking about, to make the point end use and not necessarily the land bank being the holder of the land.
And the reason is because so think of it this way. City, URA, land bank. Each of them have increased levels of responsibility for the property once they get them. The city has the least amount of responsibility for the property, right? We are not required to maintain them. We're not required to update them. We're not required to stabilize them. We have absolutely very little responsibility for the properties that we own. That may be good or bad, it's just true, right? Because we have so many, we can't afford to do that. Once the URA gets them, though, they have then their own guidelines of how those properties must be maintained and restored and whatever it is and stabilized once they get them. And then we have very strict state required mandates that once we own them, we absolutely have to maintain them, shovel the walks, cut the grass. We are required. We cannot be owners of problem properties. We're not allowed to. And so therefore, I mean, logically, you want them to stay in the land bank the shortest amount of time possible because they're expensive for us to hold. So in each, as you go up, they can hold properties longer with less expense, right? URA can hold properties longer than we can for less money. The same property, if it's in the land bank, will cost us more than it would cost the URA. And then when it goes to the city, they can hold it indefinitely longer. So it makes sense to have properties at various levels of distribution to various end users. And then we have the right tool for the right end user and move the property down to shoot. And that's the process. Hopefully I'm explaining this well.
Yes, I mean, I think that's.
And we have a new board member. So I'm talking, most of the older board members, we have two newer board members who actually kind of understand this process. But I'm saying it again, just in case you do not know why we're moving in this way. And this virtual ownership, it took us many years to get to this understanding of this. There was always this tension between those who want to own the property and those of us who just want to get it out the door. And those of us who want to get out the door won, I think. But anyway, that's a different conversation. There's a motion to approve and a second. Any more conversation? See no more conversation. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Opposers, nay. Right? I think that takes us to financial report on my agenda.
We have
The PLB, GRB law contract.
Okay.
That's all your act.
Okay. All right. PLB. I thought it was, got it. I didn't see them. So what is this?
The law contract. So one of the things we've identified is that the city did not have sufficient capacity to process the Pittsburgh property reserve items. So we were bringing a private law firm under contract. It's already familiar with the city.
To do, what would they do?
They will clear title,
Oh, the clear title people. Okay.
rapidly clear title.
is
This is your
there-
concept.
Yeah. Yeah, you didn't say it the right way. Is there a motion to approve? It's the GRB law contract is called? It's the GRB part. I didn't know that part. All right. Any conversation? Mr. Wilson?
Yes, and so could you explain that aspect of that, why we wouldn't, well, first, I guess it's an additional cost, but why wouldn't we include all city properties instead of not just the ones that are in the property reserve? That's only a small part.
Sure.
Let me start here, Matt, if I could just, so, and I want you to clarify for me. So part of this is it's very costly to do, to process these. So the URA earmarked up to $500,000 to begin to underwrite the cost for this. So that's not a cost to the PLB. So we are, and so we can't do all of the properties in the city's reserve because these are the ones that they've been waiting about 4 to 5 years for. So this allows us to do proof of concept to understand how much does it actually cost to do this. And at the same time, get some of these properties over to the community development groups that have been waiting many, many years for them to be processed. Once we're able to kind of better ascertain what the costs are, what the time length is, we can then start to figure out how to fundraise for the PLB to then handle the city's broader land recycling needs, should the city determine that that's the way that it wants to do it.
So is the cost based on the amount that we know is in the property reserve, or are we going house by house or case by case?
So we're going case by case.
So
this
is it possible to, I mean, since I don't know every single property that's in the property reserve, would it make sense to include that we could you could have access, or you could have the ability to, I guess we would need that agreement first though.
I think that we can always expand the scope of the properties if we're willing to pay for it.
right. So
But we need to start off with a smaller group because we can't afford to do it for bigger group of number, a bigger, we can't afford to do a much of a bigger number yet. And two, we want to see how effective this is. So this is sort of our pilot
Mm.
because having when we did Larmer, for instance, Larmer Choice, clearing the property titles was a nightmare, right? You see the end of it, but it took us years to do it, right? And when we saw in Homewood, when you saw them do Homewood, what's called Hamilton Kelly, no, not Hamilton Kelly, when they did the Animal Rescue League, rather, and you have a private industry who came in and did what the Animal Rescue League did in Homewood, they were able to move those properties 4 times the speed that we could do in Larmer, that the government could do. And the difference was they had hired people who specialize, where our people do it when they get around to it. They had an engine that could turn this over very, very quickly. So what we're doing now is we're hiring people who specialize in just doing this.
Oh, I get that. My question is just, why not include all properties so that, there's that possibility? Because it's just a house or case by case basis.
These ones were targeted.
Good.
These ones,
Let's put the mic.
sorry. These ones were explicitly targeted to say, if we clear title on this, OPDC is immediately ready to take action on these 3 properties. If we clear title on this, Prairie Hilltop Fineview is ready to take action on these 5. Like, these are the targeted ones that we know we can actually move.
Yeah.
There's been analysis that's been done,
Yeah.
and it's been circulated to the group
Closer to the mic.
who are part of the property reserve and part of the vacant property working group. So, they are waiting for these properties and have been provided notice that these are the list. So
Yeah. No, I think that's great. I guess I'm just wondering
why isn't it?
why,
why
I mean,
isn't it
there could be, I'm not familiar with every community. Was that?
We don't have the money.
We don't have the money and.
But we do have the money.
Can I just touch on something?
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, go ahead, can I touch on something? So this agreement is for 100 up to 150. So the targeted properties right now are the 57 that are in the property reserve. It's not technically limited to that in the agreement.
Okay.
We've targeted 57, but if there's a need to maybe throw a couple more in there in case we want to push a project or it's necessary, we're a little bit, we can do that. We can be versatile. But because the land bank is responsible for the property reserve, that's the first thing on the list. But there is some wiggle room in there in case we need to do other things.
And if we
Mhm.
clear title in
I mean-
liens, then the land bank has to own it. And now that stewardship issue comes into play because these 57 have users that have been waiting for them. We are transferring title very quickly. So then the community group will steward it, not the PLB. So if we do all of the cities, if we took all of the properties, we then have to steward them, whereas the city does not. So we want to prioritize the ones that are ready to go and become development projects.
I understand all that. My concern is just an equitable issue that OPDC may be good at getting property into the property reserve, but I may have community groups that haven't done that in the past, and I'm worried that they may be left behind if we don't just have the option to, change a strategy as we move forward.
That's Property Reserve 2.0. So we are addressing the sins of Property Reserve 1.0 to clear that pipeline. The PLB's next priority in 2022 is to create a new process that is more equitable and more transparent to allow any user that might want to engage with the PLB to do so. But we can't effectively set that process up until we fixed the first iteration of it, which has been plagued for the last 4 years. And I think Director Wilson can probably speak to that much better than I can. as somebody who's been on the other side waiting. So we're losing these assets while we're waiting for the city or the URA to steward them. We're effectively having the PLB do what it was designed to do, swoop in, fix this issue, and then create its own new property reserve in its own image paired with the community process.
Does someone have the number of properties that are in the property reserve?
I do not know the total number. I know that 57 isn't the entire.
I think it's a little under 200, if I'm not mistaken.
How many vacant and abandoned properties we have in the city of Pittsburgh? 10,000. My concern is just, I don't want to do all 10,000. I'm just saying of the
We have
ones.
room. As you just said,
Yeah.
the contracts for 150?
For 150 and it's for 6 to 9 months. So in case, so if the board wants to come back with more money and for a different time frame, there's always a chance to.
We have 100,
Re-up.
we have 100 more, 90 more slots that we can fill. If there's some communities, some properties in your community
Yeah.
that want this, we have we have the bandwidth,
$150,000.
$150,000.
So we would just come back and amend this to include,
I'm sorry.
Right. What I'm saying is like in the future, if we want to come back to GRB and to add some of the properties and
Mm.
make it a little bit more versatile the way that you're saying,
mm,
there's a way to do that. And I mean, it could even be an amendment to this if we needed to. But right
Yeah.
now, under this, because the property reserve has been such a problem for a few years, I
Mhm.
think.
I agree. I'm just,
These
you see the point I'm bringing up is that,
targeting, but it can
yeah.
change in the future if we're not locking ourselves in.
I think this is something for the board to address in its strategic plan, because I think what you're talking about is more of a strategic.
yes, it's strategic.
than it-
Yeah,
Than it
definitely.
is this particular contract. We've got to sit down together and look at that $10 million and figure out how do we want to position those dollars to start to chip away at the actual issue. And I think that there's also some, like the PLB can't do it in isolation. There may be assemblage strategies to think about neighborhood development priorities. How can the land bank be used for that? And then how can we use GRB or some other entity to clear title quickly to make those projects happen? But I think that's the strategic planning discussion that I'd like to have with the board going into 2022. And we are creating the tools that once you've made a decision, we can quickly deploy those tools to move forward.
Okay, yeah, I'll do some work and then if for some reason I locate some properties that will be outside, I can bring those forward and we can amend.
All right. There's a motion and a second already on the table, I believe. All those, any other conversation?
Add one more note. This is a good time, I think, to mention that this is where it's helpful to have capital budget resource dollars in the city's budget for the PLB, because if you want to continue to make those 10,000 properties a priority, you've got to have resources in the city's capital budget in order to do so. So I just want to put that in front of the board for consideration.
At the end of this, I think that's maybe after, right toward the end of the meeting, I'll say a little bit about vision as we move forward, and in terms of properties. I'll wait till then. Any other conversation on this particular motion? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposers, nay. Now, if I'm right, there's the next thing is not an action, but it's the finance report. Maybe an action.
We're going to do an update for you on the community cleanup with ground.
Oh, we are doing that. You mentioned it. Okay, when you were first talking, you were overviewing what you were going to do. Didn't get that. I thought that was it. Got it. So now we're talking about community cleanup and grounded strategies and Operation Better Block.
Good afternoon, everybody. I will be the land bank staff that'll be updating you all on the community cleanup. The land bank went to Homewood and we co-sponsored a community cleanup focused on vacant land activation. And we worked alongside Operation Better Block and Grounded Strategies. And we worked with Homewood's Junior Green Corps group of youth. We worked with university students from Bloomsburg University and community care stewards from Grounded's Care for Vacant Lots in the Community. One of the reasons we were a part of this event is because we're seeking to build strong partnerships with our community stakeholders that maintain and steward vacant and abandoned property in the city. In addition to aiding with the maintenance, the land bank also purchased beverages and snacks for volunteers provided by 2 local businesses in Homewood, Everyday Cafe and Dana's Bakery. We hope to work with stakeholders in the future in a way that allows community groups to be more aware of the land bank and not just our role with the city and the URA, but our role to serve the communities, which we hope to help and aid.
Any other conversation, anything else? All right, so then I think that takes us to
Financial.
financial report. I've been trying to get there. The financial report, Joe
Arlovitz,
Arlovitz,
actually come up here and sit.
there. Yeah, there you go. Hello. And just say our administrator is out and not well, and that's why you're not seeing his presence, but these other supportive staff, which is the benefit of having the URA. Because when one man goes down, they have a
5 to rise up.
whole bench. Right? They have a whole bench of substitutes ready to pinch hit.
Absolutely. Happy to be here and thank you for having me. You will see a few slides here that summarize the November activity of the PLB, as well as I wanted to provide a balance report. As you alluded to, the URA does support PLB from their bookkeeping and finance standpoint. And we are working diligently to improve this. And I want to work a little with this whole board in order to give you the clarity and the financial reporting that you want on going forward, especially as the $10 million of ARPA money comes in. So what you're seeing here is just a quick expenditures of November. I don't need to read line by line, but these are in your packet as well at the last page. If you want to go to the next slide. This financial report would be the net result, just the P&L from this year. Dr. Walker alluded to the $500,000 that the URA contributed to the PLB. That was the source of money to cover all of these expenses, totaling $23,705 so far through the end of November. In your board packet, you will see that there is an accounts payable summary showing that there is about $76,000 coming up. That will include the support staff of the URA in accordance with the cooperation agreement that this board approved in, I believe, March 22nd of 2022. If you do have any other questions about that, I'm happy to kind of brief you on that specific topic. The final report you'll see here on the next slide is a fund balance report. This is lifetime of PLB. So what this report shows is that currently in the PLB bank accounts, there's $887,000. And this chart will break out which pools of money has a remaining balance. So $39,000 from a city of Pittsburgh funding, I believe that came in 2019. Still $64,000 from the original Hines grant and a remaining $307,000 from the Hines second grant that was provided. Thank you.
Any questions about the financial report?
Yeah, I appreciate the information. I think it would be great if we could work to getting more of a traditional budget to actual, and I'd like to see, staff expenses included in our report. So I know that that's something that you've stated you're working on, but I just like to reiterate again that for us to be able to do our work properly as a board, we really need the right kind of reports. And as they are now, it's not really providing that for us.
Absolutely. Happy to, if you want to reach out to me directly or through Dr. Walker, I'm happy to provide any more details that are necessary for this board. The finances are currently in QuickBooks partially, and then URA's own NetSuite system. We are working with bookkeepers. I've already got external quotes from different bookkeeping firms in order to provide services to PLB. We're doing this in accordance with the $10 million, trying to gear up for that so that it goes into one system. But understanding what the directive is, and we will work towards that clearly in Q1 2022.
So it would be something that the URA couldn't provide that service itself?
Right now we can. I don't
We
want.
already are paying for the URA to provide that service. I'm not sure we need to pay extra.
I'm not sure that you would pay extra. I think the goal is to get the PLB high quality services. That's the number one most important thing, whether that's internal URA capacity or bookkeeping capacity. I want to be very transparent. With the advent of $75 million coming down to the URA by way of the city's ARPA allocation and 10 million of that being for PLB, we want to give the PLB the opportunity to determine, is this something that you want the URA to do through NetSuite? We'll show you what that reporting looks like. We also want to give you the option to look at a bookkeeper, and the board can tell us which path they'd like to take. Should you decide to go with the bookkeeper, the URA will not charge you twice. You will be quoted that this is what it's, if you want to pay the URA to do it, or you want to pay a bookkeeper to do it, here's the reporting that you will get, and the board can make a decision as to what you prefer.
Got it. Okay.
Any other conversation? I do not think this needs, there's no expense, so there's no need for a formal board action, but it's informational. All right, that takes us to legislative updates. my friend, my brother, all around great guy. I want to have hair like that one day. Senator Montana.
Thank you, Reverend Burgess, and good afternoon, everyone. Unfortunately, we're not in session until next week. Whether or not the municipal claims and tax lien law will move, it's hard to say. It's sitting in committee. We keep pushing, but it's stalled there by my majority party, let's say. And it's even though it's part of a task force, we got it in there. We got some Republican co-sponsors. We thought it would move, but I don't anticipate it actually moving till, unfortunately, it's probably till January at this point in time. There's not much on the agenda up there except redistricting right now seems to be the main subject. As far as House Bill 610 is concerned, this is a bill that grants land banks the same protection given to redevelopment authorities when they are dealing with environmentally compromised properties like junk yards and gas stations and that sort of thing. You don't have, it takes the worry about liability away from the land bank when it's dealing with enforcement from the DEP. That bill sponsored by Austin Davis actually in the House did go through committee 25-0, but it's what they called, it went to the floor, laid on the table. It's been sitting in there on their calendar since actually September. We're hoping it runs soon, but we just don't know, again, because the majority party controls the agenda and what gets voted on. So both of these bills are important and we keep pushing. If you know any friendly with any Republicans, please do your best to push them. These are bipartisan issues. They're not political in my view in any way, shape or form, but it's hard in these days to get that message through. So that's my report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there any new business? No new business. Is there any public comment? We have a public comment section both before and after. Anyone wanting to address this land bank board?
Would. Hi, I'm on the Zoom.
Hi, how you doing?
Hi there. Hi everybody. My name's Lou. I'm actually a Vista member right now with the city. I'm working with Shelley Danko Day in food policy. So thanks for having this meeting. And I just wanted to offer up a few thoughts about how you're going to be moving into the new year. The first is, I know you're seeking to build partnerships with stakeholders in the community. A really big group of stakeholders that I really hope you tap into are people who are working in urban agriculture. We have a lot of community members who are growing either on their own lots or on lots with community groups, gardens, farms, for-profit, nonprofit, you name it. And it's something that's really picking up in the city right now. And the community is really asking about access to land. Long-term access to land is one of the main concerns. So I hope that you can find ways to tap into urban agriculture and view that as a community resource, just as development is. And we have a short list of people who are eager to buy land that they have been working on through the Adopt a Lot program, which only provides short-term leases for people to be able to grow on. But if there could be a mechanism where we work in partnership with all of you to get some of those participants, some who have been stewarding the land for 10 plus years, actual ownership over their property, that would be amazing. So just consider that to be something that the community really cares about. And I would love to see this connecting on. They're also already asking about how they can use the land bank in a way that will be efficient for them. And then the second thing is a question. I know we had discussion over the properties that are in the Pittsburgh Property Reserve, those 57, and you said there's room for other properties to be considered. How could some of my community members or organizations petition to have one of their properties be the one that is considered on a shorter timeline through the property reserve? Thank you.
Thank you. That ends our public comment section. I typically don't respond to public comment, but I will at least this moment to say there are two ways in which the member public can contact the land bank. One is through the URA staff. Certainly, you're welcome to contact the URA staff for any issue that you want. Second of all, you have the capacity to talk to any board member of the URA for a similar exposure to our work and our activity. Okay, so I want to give some concluding thoughts, and I'm really grateful for her response, because I think this is something we're going to have to really take seriously in the new year. There is a variety of community stakeholders who have a variety of interest around land use and projects. Some of those interests are very strong, right? Thoughts, feelings, emotions. But then there is the property itself and what the property actually has the potential to become and do, and its condition and its state. We're going to have to create a process that is objective, that somehow identifies the property and looks at its future potential in use before we decide to take it on. And of course, the community can recommend. But before we put any money into any properties, I'm going to be pretty strong of saying that we're not going to rehab properties unless we are very clear about its in-use potential. If that's not really our role, that's a URA role, that's a city role, that should not be the land bank's role. For instance, I'll give you a great for instance. In my community, it was a school, Homewood School. I went there for K through third grade before I went to Catholic school. Great building. It really had no use. It was too big for a private organization to take over. School buildings, when most nonprofits take over school buildings, it'll bankrupt them. The heat alone just killed them. There were really strong feelings about the building, about preserving it, about, there was all this community interest in the building and a real strong desire for the city or someone to rehab it or someone to preserve it and turn it over to the community groups. At the end of the day, the URA decided to work on extending the baseball field to create a new sports arena, and it needed parking, and so the highest and best use of that building actually was to be torn down so there'd be adequate parking, because parking was choking the community on game days, right? But had we simply only listened to the community group's passion, we'd have put money into that building, which is now in the ground, and that money would have had no beneficial effect. It is my experience, and I'm just being clear, that I understand community groups and individuals' interests of properties, right? I grew up in Pittsburgh. There are properties I love, right? Holy Rosary Church, I love that building. Right now, that building has no in use. If I put money into it, well, not that we're going there, but the church, that's the Catholic Church's job, but it's not, because it has no in use. We need to be really disciplined about this, because if not, we're going to get thousands of community people with thousands of community projects that they're very passionate about, that they have sentimental value to, that they have high hopes and dreams of turning into the best thing you've ever seen, but no practical, market-driven, or fundraising capacity to make that a reality. I want to encourage them to dream big and be great. But I want to refrain from a board and from using our resources to simply fix up doomed property that may or may not have an end use. And I will be very, 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 I'll argue that, and I may not win, but I'll argue that strenuously, because I've been on the other side. I've seen community groups lobby for individual properties that were condemned, that had no use, because they wanted to maintain it, because they loved it. But it had realistically no chance of being rebuilt. And our money, we're throwing good money in the bad. And even though the ARPA money looks like a lot of money. It really isn't when you look at the thousands of properties we have. And Homewood alone is what, 60% vacant with vacant structures. There's just too many of them. So we need a policy that's transparent and objective. So when someone comes to us and says, we want you to maintain this property, we as a board says, okay, here's our rules. This fits or doesn't fit. So it's fair across the board. And hopefully that makes some sense. That's my vision of how this will go. And I'm going to talk to Dr. Walker and and the board, and hopefully approve development of such a matrix before we start spending money to rehab or to help properties that don't have clear community driven and community funded opportunities to be rehabbed. So that's what I think. And that's what I
Good
did.
news is the URA already has a logic model very similar to that. So I think that we can leverage some of the work that our disposition team has done for URA properties and use that for the land bank. And I think it's a great point that the PLBs function to clear title and to have it ready for such a destiny is not the same as investing dollars to a singular destiny without the broader analysis. And I think that lends itself to the city's larger land use strategy that needs to be talked about, but we'll get there.
I think we will. I just want to give, like I said, vision cast. That's just my vision. I could be wrong. Any final things? If no final things, I'll take a motion to, Merry Christmas, everybody, and Happy New Year. I'm sorry. I want everyone, or Happy Hanukkah, or whatever holiday, or Kwanzaa, whatever your religious perspective, please enjoy this holidays. This is both for my holidays. It's also my anniversary. And so I was married, I got married, but when God was young. So, and so, who I met in the first grade. And so, I'm hoping that everyone though have a blessed, prosperous Christmas season and prosperous new year. We will have a new mayor coming in, and we will have a new council reconvening. And so I'm looking forward to those two things and doing great things in our city. With that, now I will entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So move.
All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposers, nay.
Thank you.
We're adjourned.